Thanks, Matt, for that wonderful intro. So we're starting you off on the lightest track as far as technical goes, and we'll get deeper throughout the day. Thanks so much for your time. Right now, we're going to talk about the cloud native landscape, which is a document you may have seen pictures of in various places, or you may be familiar with it itself. It's changed a little bit in the last month or so, and Catherine knows the exact time frame, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so as Fahim already mentioned, my co-presenter today is Jason Morgan, and he's a technical evangelist at Buoyant, the creator of Linkerd, one of the CNCF projects. We're both co-chairs of the Business Value Subcommittee and maintainers of the Cloud Native Glossary and the authors of the CNCF Landscape Guide, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today.
And then I'm joined by Catherine, who's head of marketing, has really been the driving force behind the glossary, behind the landscape, and the conference. And so I'm super grateful to her and really excited to be presenting with her today.
Okay, so today we're going to look at the landscape first and just see what updates are there. I mean, you may or may not have seen them. Then we're going to tell you a little bit how we got there. We are going to discuss the landscape architecture, tell you how to use it, and then we're going to make like a little trip to the glossary, and then we'll let you know how you can help if you would like to be involved.
Awesome. Thank you. So the landscape, I'm actually going to get out of slides and hop over to it, but it's changed, and let's show how it's changed. So this, if you haven't seen it, is the cloud native landscape. There are posters of it. There are, diagrams of that guy from It's Always Sunny doing his conspiracy thing over it. There's a lot going on here. And when we looked at it, wanted to make it a little bit more friendly. And one thing that's changed is now if you go to it, there's a guide button on the top right where you can hop over to what you'd expect, an interactive guide, which will talk about the various sections and what it means. And there's also on each section, there's a little info icon that you can click on to get specifically to the part of the landscape guide that talks about that piece. Okay, and let's go back to the slides. Catherine, back to you.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you just saw this mammoth landscape, and have you ever felt overwhelmed while looking at it? Well, we certainly did. And so we wanted to understand it better and thought that others might probably too. So we started writing a series for the new stack where we broke each layer and column down into different categories. And so we got really, really good feedback from different people. And at some point we thought, this is actually the type of content that the CNCF should own, right? So we approached the CNCF and started the Business Value Subcommittee and created our first project, which was the Cloud Native Glossary. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Our second project was this landscape guide that we just saw. And basically what we did is we adapted the new stack series into this guide. And then because it is like this huge piece of content, we also added those little icons because we thought that would be a little bit more user-friendly. So you can jump right to that section as Jason showed you. So both of them launched during KubeCon. So super excited about that. On a side note, something that also launched at KubeCon and is also available to you now, and we're really excited, is the new business value track. So as of this CFP for Europe, now it's part of the regular CFP. So if you or your clients have achieved real business value with cloud native technologies, please submit a talk. These stories are really important. They really help kind of drive adoption because people need to understand how you actually derive value from these technology, right? Not only how cool these technologies are. Anyways, so that's basically how we got to change the landscape. And now I think it's time to have a look at the landscape and how it works. So Jason, over to you.
Thank you so much. And like Catherine said, we're going to post a link to the Business Value Slack channel later And yeah, really, really interested in more and more stories that folks can tell about, going from the gee whiz technical thing to this is how our business changed for the better by using cloud native tech. So with that, back to the landscape. So let's talk about this thing and make it a little bit less scary for everybody, right? So there are, the cloud native landscape itself is kind of like a stack or a cake or whatever you want to call it. So there's a bunch going on. We're going to talk about what the different uh, layers and columns mean, what's in the categories, what's the difference between the boxes, why are they different sizes, all that stuff. So with that, let's hop right back to the landscape. So what you see here, that, like I said, there's a lot going on, but we have these big blocks, right? So down here are rows. So we have special, which, there's not actually a ton to say about that. Provisioning, runtime, whatever, a bunch of stuff. And then within those rows, we've got groupings, right? So this is a category within a layer, right? And we also, if we glide over here to the right, we've got two kind of cross-cutting things or columns, as you'll see them described in our presentation, right? So basically, the things that make up your cloud native stack or your application platform, and then the actual application can be on the left, layered up together. And the things on the right-hand side are going to be cross-cutting concerns that either help with multiple things or are needed to make multiple layers work together. So that's the basic concept. And at any time, you can click on one of these things, see a description of what this section is, right? We tried to write everything in very plain language. If you have comments, you can make comments directly on the landscape repo and raise issues. But for each section, we tell you what it is, the problem that it's made to address, how it addresses that problem, and a little bit of deeper technical knowledge on the subject. If in some cases we have an info box, and for each one we do buzzwords and graduated projects. Graduated projects. On top of that, we'll see here, right, we've got big boxes, small boxes, and white and gray boxes, right? So a big box is either dark blue, which means it's a graduated project, which is not that it's left the CNCF, but that the CNCF has determined that this open source project meets its highest standard for maturity, right? And that it's absolutely something that you should feel comfortable adopting. Incubating is a mature project that has not yet hit graduated status for whatever reason. And then there are sandbox projects that we can't see from this view. The other thing to look at is for these little boxes, they're all either white or gray. White boxes represent or are meant to represent an open source project, and the gray boxes are meant to represent a commercial or a closed source offering. So let's just hop into what's a good one. So this one, storage has it all. So let's just go in here. Oh, didn't mean to go on Longhorn. There we go. Cloud native storage. If I click on the top here, we'll hop in. So I can see that we've got, some closed source things, some open source things, and we also have a couple that are in light blue, or in this case, one that's in light blue. And that means it's a CNCF sandbox project. So that's a pretty low barrier to entry to get in to be a sandbox project. And that doesn't mean it's not mature. It doesn't mean it's not good. It just means it hasn't hit the CNCF criteria for stepping up their ladder. And I think that's it. Catherine, back to you to actually talk about what some of these layers mean.
Yeah, I mean, like we like Jason already provided this nice overview, but let's look at each layer individually, right? So we basically just said like there's like a really like a there is something behind it. So like you have like the lowest layer, and then you kind of move up your stack, right? So at the very bottom, the first layer is the provisioning layer. And here you find all the tools that you need to create and harden the foundation of your cloud native apps, right? So automation and configuration, container registry, security and compliance. There you have the OPA project that graduated, I think, early this year, and key management. Those are kind of the things that you will find here.
Yeah, beyond or above that, right? So it's kind of layered in terms of how you think of your platform, right? So at the bottom, it's stuff we need to either secure the foundations or actually deploy our environment. Above that, we have our runtime layer, right? That is our cloud native storage. What are we going to do as far as provisioning disks, whatever else that may be? The container runtime itself, provided that we're using containers, or Firecracker if you're using very small little VMs. So this is where you find Containerd, Cryo, Firecracker, whatever else, and then cloud native networking, including the pretty commonly adopted CNI.
Okay, and the next layer is the orchestration and management layer. There you'll find scheduling and orchestration, and this is where the famous Kubernetes project lives. You have coordination and service discovery, remote procedure calls. gRPC is kind of a big thing. Everyone is talking about it. Service proxy, Envoy is also very big here. API gateway and service mesh. And service mesh, of course, is very dear to our hearts because that's where the Linkerd project, our project, lives.
Absolutely. App definition and development. So kind of top, it's the top thing on the landscape. It's also the top of your stack as you're thinking about your environment. So this is everything from, how am I going to store and persist data, right? To, am I going to use a messaging service, which is very much an application level concern? Do we want to use Helm to deploy our own applications, or are we using vendor provided Helm charts to deploy things? We also have build packs in here. So if you haven't looked at cloud native build packs, this is where you'll find tooling to actually inspect your code, build your container without you having to write Docker files at all. The operator framework and a ton of other great stuff falls under this category. Last but not least, continuous integration and delivery. Now there's a whole continuous delivery foundation, which has much more in this space that you can dig into. But this is where we find the Argo project, Flagger and Flux. So tools for doing progressive delivery, all of our GitOps stuff. You also see things like Jenkins, GitLab, and a bunch of other tools end up over here.
Okay, so those were all the layers, right? And now we're moving to the columns. And we're going to look first at observability and analysis, and just like to what does it actually mean? So observability basically is the degree, it defines like the degree to which a system is, you can understand it through its outputs, and analysis is when you look at that data and make sense of it, right? That's why you're going to find monitoring, logging, and tracing here, and chaos engineering is kind of a little bit interesting here because it does not really fit in the observability and analysis, but it does help you understand your system better, or like keep your system healthy, and that's why it's kind of embedded in this category. And because you really kind of need to observe the entire stack, like everything, that's why it's at the side and not embedded in one of those layers.
Yeah, awesome. Now, last but not least, platforms, right? So this is everything from, your Kubernetes distributions. That's like open source things, or more proprietary things like your VMware Tanzu, or OpenShift, or whatever, right? Whatever else in that space. But this is like all the bits bundled together to deploy your Kubernetes cluster so that you can kind of get that going and get up and running. Past that, right, in the next little category, we've got the hosted Kubernetes, right? Or I used to call them the star KSs, right? It is your GKE, EKS, AKS, I forget DigitalOcean's one, Civo Cloud, right? All those various Kubernetes as a service providers live in here. And if I didn't mention it, it's not, a dig against the product, just can't remember everything at the spur of the moment. Past that, we have our installers. So cool stuff like kubeadm lives here. RKE lives here, K3D and K3S, COPS, right? Like the tools that, in the before times, a lot of us had to use to like actually get our clusters up and going at first, and people still use it obviously all the time today. And last but not least, this is where we find PaaS or container services, right? Specifically, you'll find things like Heroku and Cloud Foundry for those that are looking for, something that can, take your code and run it in the cloud for you without you having to worry about how that happens. And that's it.
Yeah, and so that's basically the landscape on a very high level. If you want to learn more, check out the guide. There's a lot of content there. But yeah, as promised, we also wanted to tell you a little bit about this other project that we did, the Cloud Native Glossary, and you can find it on glossary.cncf.io. You can also navigate to it through the CNCF webpage under Community. And yeah, so basically what we wanted to do is to try to explain the most important cloud native terms in simple words, right? So our goal is to make it accessible not only to technical people, but also to non-technical people. But before I talk too much, why don't we have a quick look, Jason?
Yeah. And right after this, we're going to talk about our kind of call to action, right? But what the glossary site is it's a series of terms. I think about 48 right at this moment because I've been slacking on getting the last 2 done. But it's a bunch of terms that are things we'll use in Cloud Native that are open sourced, that are available for people to edit or complain about, right? So at any point you can go in, click the edit page or report issue to go over to the Git repo that powers all of this. And the goal here is to take something like what is an API gateway, right? And explain it in as plain language as we possibly can. So even if you don't start out, already indoctrinated in the cloud native space and in cloud native tooling, you can get a sense of what it means, like what the word means. First, simply what it is, what problem space it's looking to address, and then how it helps with that problem space, right? And of course, your feedback is really valuable. If you like the definitions, link to it, or just say you like it on Twitter, whatever, right? Although I don't imagine people are reading the glossary for fun. But regardless, link to it if you find that it's a useful definition in the things you're writing. You can link to each individual term. You can also link to the subsections as needed. And at any point, if you have a problem with the definition, you can send a pull request, or you can just open an issue right there and tell us that we need to fix A, B, or C. Of course, fixes with pull requests get prioritized over just telling me something doesn't work. And yeah, that's the long story short. So let me go back to presentation.
Okay, and so yeah, we would love to get involved, join the business value subcommittee. If you know of a resource that would be helpful, let's do it together. We really can bring it to life. So one of the things that Jason and I have learned is that if you have an idea, are willing to lead it, of course, if it makes sense, the CNCF is super supportive, and you can, look at us. We're not now on the CNCF landscape. It's really exciting, and there's a lot you can do. So to get involved, to get started, join our Slack channel, ask to be invited to our monthly meetings. But if you just if you thought like the glossary or something like more smaller would be fine, yeah, have a look there. Do you see something is missing or needs to be updated? Submit a PR, as Jason said. There are really so many ways you can contribute to the community without necessarily having to contribute code. So yes, we would love for you to be part of it. And yeah, thanks for listening today.
Yeah, and just one more before that, we're also in the process of looking to add the glossary into more languages. So if you are a native speaker of a language other than English, also love to start getting terms in other languages, right? Because obviously, technology isn't or shouldn't be limited to folks speaking a particular language. And we'd love to get it in your particular area of expertise. So sorry for all the asks here, but you can do a lot if you're willing to get involved, and we'd love to help other people also share things and impact the environment. I want to give a quick preview of what's next. Following this call, right? If people don't have questions, we can take a little break. But we've also got growing up in a cloud native org, right? Which seems fantastic. Local development techniques with Kubernetes, and you've seen the rest of the schedule, so I'm not gonna hammer through it, right? But there's a lot of great talks coming up, and you can see when they'll be for the rest of the day. And of course, you can also see that on the community site as well. All right, Fahim, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to ask, there's a question from Peter. Is there a way to compare a large box to a smaller one by feature to understand the benefits
Yeah, great question, Peter. Really appreciate it. So let me pop in. Long story short is no, absolutely. So none of these things are actually value judgments, right? Or they may be, but the size of your box in the landscape guide is 100% related to what stage you are in the CNCF adoption cycle, right? So the adoption cycle is 3 tiers, right? You have sandbox, which is fairly straightforward to get into. You have incubating, which is there's some amount of technical validation having been done by the CNCF, right? That's not saying just because you're a sandbox project doesn't mean you're not mature, but it means the CNCF hasn't rated you that way, right? Then incubating. So the first way to get a big box is to be incubating, right? That means you've gone through the CNCF process from sandbox through to incubating. And then the last box, which isn't any bigger, it's just darker, right? So we can see it here under application and application definition and image build, right? Build packs are incubating because that's how far they've been validated through the CNCF, and Helm is graduated, right? Now it's not apples to apples when you compare these things because they're totally different projects that do totally different things. I hope that answered your question, Peter.
Awesome, thank you. And then Musa is asking about the CNCF Slack channel. So we just need to share that, I think.
Okay, yeah. So we'll post the link in the chat, or Catherine, if you don't mind, could you post the link to join the Slack for the CNCF? And then once you're in there, it's the what is it? The business values. I'll post the hashtag in the chat as well, just so you have it, right? But we'd love to hear from you. Can't wait. There's also a Glossary maintainer or a Glossary Slack. That may only be for maintainers, but if you're interested in becoming a maintainer, we're happy to involve you in that as well.
And then one more question before I let you go. So can you repeat what is the difference between the gray and the white boxes?
Yeah. So it is, are you an open source project or are you something that is closed source or commercial?
Okay. Because I saw like AKS had a white box and AWS had a gray.
Well, so they have, that's actually a really funny one. So what there is, it's great because there's AKS, the Azure Kubernetes Service, as gray, and there's Microsoft's AKS engine for Azure Stack, which is a little thing they open source. So there's a lot of things going. A lot of things.
I think AWS is also coming up with something like that. It's their own open source version of the engine that you can run on-prem as well.
Yeah, if you look in here, I don't know if it's in there, but you'll see VMware down at the bottom for the VMware Tanzu, right? But they also have a Tanzu community. Oh yeah, okay, so it's already in there now. So you can see there's the community edition, and then there's their paid version.
All right, thank you so much.